Hi, I'm Kathy Wearsbicky from Time to Quilt, and I'm excited to be here today to introduce you to Triangle Genie and Triangle Genie Junior. These are brand new tools from Time to Quilt, and they're designed for making half square and quarter square triangles in a variety of configurations from strips. Triangle Genie Junior is dedicated to 2.5-inch strips, and the larger Triangle Genie does exactly the same thing times 5 because it has 5 strip sizes built into it. So if you like to make triangles, or if you don't, this might be the tool for you because you can make triangles from strips, the same size strips that fit your squares and rectangles, with no measuring, no wasted fabric, no paper to tear away. You don't have to cut individual pieces and align them. You don't have to handle bias edges, and you can make half square and quarter square triangles in a variety of configurations. Now the first thing I'm going to show you is how to make half square triangles from strips. And I'm using Triangle Genie Junior today because I'm using a 2.5-inch strip. You could use Triangle Genie as well because that same size is built into that tool. But just for simplicity today, I'm going to use Triangle Genie Junior. And it's just a matter of positioning the tool on your strip and marking a line at each end of the tool, both ends, and then through each of the slots on the Genie. There's 2 diagonal and 1 vertical slot that go right through the tool so that you can mark lines, and you just reposition it on your strip and continue marking until your entire strip is marked. Then take that marked strip, pair it with whatever fabric you want to make your half square triangles out of, and then sew a 1/4 inch on each side of just the diagonal lines. Do that across your entire strip, then cut it apart on each of the drawn lines, and you have half square triangles. Now watch what happens when I take a solid strip underneath and I have a pieced strip on top. The top one I pieced with 2 smaller strips, sewed them together so that they equaled 2.5 inches, and then I marked it exactly the same way, sewed a 1/4 inch on each side of the diagonal lines all across the strip, then cut it apart on each of the drawn lines, and I get that unit. Isn't that cool? Now watch what happens here. Because the top and the bottom strips are both pieced from smaller strips, still it measures 2.5 inches top to bottom. Mark the strip exactly the same way, sew a 1/4 inch on each side of your diagonal line, then cut apart on each of the drawn lines, and that's the design you get. Isn't that cool? Okay, here's a close-up of Triangle Genie. This is the larger version of the tool, but I'm still using a 2.5-inch strip here. So can you see that the top of the strip falls right in there at the 2.5-inch line, and you always align the bottom edge of your fabric at this line here, and that tells you that on the tool, align with edge of fabric strip. And so if you're working with a larger size, each of the horizontal markings for strip heights has corresponding slots. So here's the slot for 1.5 inch and 2 and 2.5. So if you're using 2.5-inch strip, for example, you would mark through this slot. The diagonals and the center vertical apply to all strip sizes, and then you would make your other mark down here through this 2.5-inch slot. And then when you reposition it along the strip, you want to be sure that this slot on the left here you position over the line that you drew on this slot. So just be sure that you're always drawing your lines through the vertical slot that corresponds to whatever strip length you're using. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to do quarter square triangles from strips. So the technique is the same as far as marking. Position your tool on your strip and mark it exactly the way we did before, and then pair that marked strip with another solid strip underneath. But this time we're only going to sew 2 seams. One at a 1/4 inch from the top, and do that across the entire length of the strip, and then do it again across the entire bottom length of the strip. 1/4 inch from the top and bottom edges, and that's all you sew. Now you simply cut it apart on all of the drawn lines, just cut across the strip, and that's the unit that you get. Isn't that cool? Of course, if you want 2 of your triangles to be the same color, like for flying geese, just make both of your strips the same color. Now here's another strip that I marked. I marked it exactly the same way, sewed a 1/4 inch along the entire top edge and the bottom edge. The piece underneath is 2 smaller strips that I've sewn together. So I sewed the 2 seams across the strip, cut it apart on each of the drawn lines, and that's the unit that I get. Isn't that cool? Now watch what happens here. Both the top and the bottom strips, I don't know if you can see this, but both of the top and the bottom strips are pieced. So in other words, two smaller strips pieced together to equal 2.5 inches, marked exactly the same way, sew a 1/4 inch across both the top and the bottom, cut it apart on each of the drawn lines, and now look at the units that you get. The design possibilities are just endless. The next thing I want to show you is how to make 3-dimensional flying geese. So for this technique, you put your, you need a strip on top, you need a folded strip in the middle, and another strip on the bottom. Your top and bottom strips are the same fabric, and then you've sandwiched a folded strip in the middle, and the instructions tell you what size to cut that strip for, depending on what size flying geese you want. But for this one, you position the Genie on your strip, but you only mark the vertical lines. You mark each end of the tool and then just the vertical marks. Ignore the diagonals for this. So draw your vertical lines and then sew a 1/4 inch on each side, on just the right side of each drawn line. So you mark the verticals, sew a 1/4 inch on the right side of the drawn lines, and then cut it apart on the drawn lines, but don't open it yet. That cut unit now needs to be squared up. So whatever your strip height is, this is 2.5, then I have to trim this down to be 2.5 inches, because you see when I start it ends up being a rectangle, so I need to trim away a little bit. Now you open that up. Open up one end. See if I can do this one-handed. Now this is the folded strip, so you have to take this top edge, this crease right here, and bring it to the center and press out those diagonal edges. Do it carefully with an iron, and that's what you end up with. Now this has 3-dimensional little loosey-goosey edges, so you can top stitch them or applique them, or what I did when I was doing some demos was I put a pin at a 1/4 inch, and then I just rolled this edge back and top stitched it down, and then that gives you the look of cathedral windows. You'll end up with a curved seam there if you just roll that back and then top stitch it down. That's 3-dimensional flying geese. Give it a try. Now the next thing I want to show you is 3-dimensional kites, and this is a little bit different. This one we do have to have some individual pieces and work with a bias edge. Do you see if I mark my strip like so, all I have to do is cut it apart without any sewing. Just cut it apart and I have individual half-square triangles. So for this, for each kite I need 2 half-square triangles, and this is a 2.5 inch square which I have folded and pressed diagonally. Now to position this, we're going to make a little fabric sandwich, and you take this folded square and position it on your half square triangle so that this point is right about there. It's right where it makes that turn at the top of the triangle, and line up those edges, and then make your sandwich by putting this piece on top. And then once you're all neatly aligned, which I'm not here, but now you're going to sew a 1/4 inch along this side. And here's one that I've already done. So I made my sandwich. Oops. There's my sandwich. Okay, the center folded square is in the middle, and I sewed a 1/4 inch along the cut edge, and now you open it up. Fold this one back and press it flat. Take this point right there and move it to that position. This folded point now comes to the point where your 2 background pieces come together, and press it out flat, and you have 3-dimensional kites. How cool is that? So now that you've made all these really cool triangle units, what are you going to do with them? Well, you already have patterns that you are currently making that have half-square triangles in them. So for the ones I showed you today, these finish at 2 inches. So if you want to begin just practicing with Genie, just start by making half-square triangles and work them into patterns that you already have. Now I'm going to continue to show you some other things that you can do with it. These are the half-square triangles that were made with a solid strip on one side and a piece strip on the other. And this isn't all the things you can do with it, but it'll give you some of the design ideas. That's the same unit there. That's the same unit there. These are the same units too. You can just flip them and turn them and get all kinds of interesting designs. Here's a star. I used that same element to get the star tips and put a solid square in the center and two on the corners. Here's another one. You can make some really cool diamond, double diamond designs. This could be a great border. Here's another one that could be a block unit or part of a star, or it could be another border unit. Over here, this is a different unit. These are half square triangles again, but these were made where both the top and the bottom strips were pieced with smaller strips. So here's just some ideas of some things you can do by just orienting those pieces in different directions. Here's another star. I just filled in the corners with solid squares. And over here are some quarter square units that I did with where one strip was solid and then I put a piece strip on top and cut those out. Because sometimes you get mirror images, sometimes you get you know, 4 different designs. I don't remember what I got here, but might have been 4 different designs. So you can see how you can just flip them and turn them. There's the same unit in a different configuration, gives you an entirely different block design. And here you can orient it a little bit differently and get a big star that you can fill in the middle with whatever you're working on. So check back, because I'm going to be doing pattern support for this. There will be more patterns available, and obviously, like I said, this isn't all that you can do with it, but it'll give you some idea of the versatility and get you started sewing and making triangle units with Triangle Genie and Triangle Genie Junior. Check it out, timetoquilt.com.